美国2月13日星期四，参众两院针对美国国际开发署举行了多场的听证会，多位共和党议员怒批该机构在拜登政府领导下成了烧钱黑洞，并指控其资助不当计划，甚至涉及争议性的武汉病毒研究。在参议院国土安全委员会听证会上，肯塔基州共和党参议员兰德保罗列举了一堆 USAID 的神奇花钱方式，指控 USAID 资金被滥用于无意义的项目。他强调，这些支出不仅无助于美国国际发展目标，还浪费纳税人的血汗钱，应该立即停止。
I uncovered over $1 trillion in government waste, with the State Department and USAID being some of the worst offenders. Let me give you just a few examples of what these unelected bureaucrats are spending your hard-earned money on. $4.8 million went to Ukraine's public affairs office in Kiev to fund social media influencers. Instead of protecting our own border, $2.1 million was sent to Paraguay to enhance their border security. USAID also funded a group of Ukrainian women-led designers to travel to the Paris fashion show. I don't know about you, but I'd imagine Ukrainian women have more important things to worry about than appearing in the Paris fashion show. USAID spent $2 million on transgender surgeries, hormone therapy, and gender-affirming care in Guatemala. $3 million was spent to promote girl-centric climate action in Brazil. And I'd love to picture what a conversation about girl-centered climate action looks like. It's like, hey, Barbie, do you know what girl-centered climate change is? Since when do we believe arguments need to be tailored for girls to understand? How insulting to women at large that they think there are special arguments for girls to understand that are different than boys. $25,000 to fund a transgender opera in Colombia. Was nobody in Colombia willing to buy a ticket? USAID spent $32,000 in Peru to create a comic featuring a trans hero to address social and mental health issues. What does that have to do with diplomacy? $20,000 to fund a DEI program for a drag theater in Ecuador. $20 million was spent to produce a new Sesame Street show in Iraq. USAID spent $6 million to promote a project boosting sustainable tourism in Egypt. I guess the U.S. is now the travel agent for the entire world, since they spent $50 million on Tunisia's tourism, even though it's already one of the most visited countries in Africa. USAID gave $87.9 million to help Afghans farm, and incidentally, farm poppy, the plant from which opium is extracted. As of 2021, Afghanistan supplied 90% of the world's heroin. I thought the saying in the U.S. was just say no to drugs. How about we just say no to wasteful foreign aid? $70,000 for a live musical event to promote diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility in Ireland. State Department paid $330,000 to compile a disinformation index to blacklist conservative media outlets. USAID funneled over $54 million to EcoHealth Alliance, funding the very organization linked to the Wuhan Institute of Virology, the likely origin of the COVID-19 pandemic. Disgraceful. $15 million was awarded to Taliban-controlled Afghanistan to distribute oral contraceptives and condoms. There's still a $3 billion fund for Afghan reconstruction that I've tried to take that money to pay for other things that the government is spending money on, and yet there's been resistance by the other side to deplete that fund and say, we're done funding things in Afghanistan. This is just the tip of the iceberg. These are taxpayer dollars being used to fund ideologically misguided, ineffective, and unnecessary projects, thanks to the blundering bureaucracy, while our own citizens struggle to put food on the table. This is not what our government was designed to do. The U.S. government is not a charity, and it should not be doling out cash to foreign organizations, some of which actively oppose the United States with no oversight. And we don't have the money to give. We're borrowing the money we send. We need to ask a simple question. Why are we borrowing money to send money overseas? Even if USAID eliminated the crazy left-wing grants for trans operas, it still makes no sense to borrow money to then turn around and send it overseas. Borrowing money to send as charity is like the worker who has no money left after paying for their food, rent, and gas, saying, oh, well, I see this homeless person, I have such great sympathy. I'll go to the bank and I'll borrow $1,000 to give to this person. That's what we are doing. We can't pay for our own, and we are borrowing the money we send overseas. That money could be used to pay down our $36 trillion debt and take care of the American people, the very people who actually pay these taxes in the first place. It's time for a real change. America should not continue to be the world's piggy bank. It's time to end the waste of foreign aid and end the bureaucracy and for once do what's right by the American taxpayer.
而爱荷华州共和党籍参议员乔尼恩斯特则在听证会上进一步指出 ，USAID 可能资助了中国武汉实验室的功能增强研究。这种研究涉及改变病毒的基因，以提升其传染性或毒性。
Yet the hard truth is, as we have seen, USAID has been out of control for decades. There's no shortage of questionable USAID projects. For example, a $20 million grant to the Sesame Workshop nonprofit to create an Iraqi version of Sesame Street. More than $9 million intended for civilian food and medical supplies in Syria ended up in the hands of violent terrorists. And another one, $27 million, was designated to so-called reintegration gift bags, which may even include a Barbie doll for deported Central Americans. There was also $68,000 awarded for dance classes in none other than Wuhan, China. And after being stonewalled by USAID for years, I learned funds meant for economic relief in Ukraine were instead paying for Ukrainian models and designers to attend fashion weeks in New York City, London, and Paris. And Mr. Chair, I ask unanimous consent to enter my oversight letters and USAID's responses into the record. Thank you, Mr. Chair. USAID is notorious for exploiting legal loopholes, as my COVID-19 origins investigations exposed. By law, all federal spending is required to be publicly available on usaspending.gov. We've known for a while that Dr. Fauci used NIH funding to finance bat coronavirus research at the Wuhan Institute of Virology, but it took the watchdog White Coat Waste Project to expose evidence that USAID was funding it too. In fact, the bulk of the money came from USAID. Yet no grants to the Chinese lab appeared on usaspending.gov. It was hidden from the public through layers of unreported subgrants and subawards. Thankfully, my push to defund EcoHealth Alliance was successful, and the group is now barred from receiving U.S. government grants. But this is why my TRACS Act must become law to prevent money being sent to China, the Taliban, or any other foreign adversary. Every grant recipient must be disclosed to ensure accountability, and we shouldn't stop there. My bipartisan Stop Secret Spending Act, introduced with Ranking Member Peters, would add additional transparency to federal spending. So, Mr. Schellenberger, I'll start with you, please. Why is USAID so secretive about how it spends billions of taxpayer dollars? Is it to avoid the public outrage over the waste, or is there something more nefarious there?
Well, thank you, Senator. And first of all, thank you for your leadership in bringing transparency and accountability to aid and the funding there. Obviously, this example you just gave of the Wuhan Institute of Virology is incredible. I mean, the fact it appears that the U.S. government funded the creation of the virus that caused the global pandemic. We also know that President Barack Obama had banned that research, and that Anthony Fauci had created a workaround to get around that and move that research to the Wuhan Institute of Virology. Had there been some transparency about it, I think some questions would have been raised. One of the claims, of course, that was made right after Senator Cotton raised the idea that maybe it did leak from a lab. Washington Post claimed it was a debunked conspiracy theory. Anybody who had just Googled virus lab leak would have discovered that there had been years and years, maybe decades, of news stories about viruses leaking from labs. It's a very common thing, and of course, it was one of the main reasons that we wanted to end that risky gain-of-function research, because we knew it was the high risk of something leaking from a lab. So I think I applaud your work. We need much more transparency with it. As I mentioned before, I do think that some part of that motivation may have been to hide regime change operations that were run by USAID in concert with the State Department. If you're going to be doing regime change operations, those belong in the State Department and with the CIA, not in a charitable organization, because if you genuinely want people to trust in vaccines or other public health measures, it's a terrible thing for them to believe that maybe it's part of some counterterrorism operation or some manipulation by the U.S. government that has some political motivation or some regime change motivation. If it's truly, truly charitable support for things like, for good causes, then there has to be a firewall between that and what the CIA and the State Department are doing.
Yeah, transparency. It is so important.
与此同时，在众议院外交事务委员会听证会上，田纳西州共和党籍众议员马克格林痛批民主党人假装关心预算削减，却对 USAID 的乱花钱睁一只眼闭一只眼，直说这根本是鳄鱼的眼泪。他认为民主党对该机构的资金浪费视而不见，如今却对预算削减大惊小怪，根本是双重标准。
USAID has been an unapologetic front for a far-left agenda. It has become self-evident there weren't a handful of foolish policies, but rather a coordinated strategy of radical, idiotic, and often anti-American priorities. Idiotic, you say? Millions to teach Moroccans how to make pottery? The Moroccans were making pottery before we were a country. This entire debate today and the crocodile tears from Democrats just goes to show what's wrong with this town. Not a single Democrat I've heard has expressed dismay at the many examples of crazy, wasteful spending. I don't understand the objection to a deep dive in how we spend our money, but perhaps it's the fact that over the last several weeks, a massive surge has occurred in the search for a criminal defense attorney. That probably says it all. 5 times in this city, any other city in the nation. I'd like to remind the committee that President Kennedy unilaterally created USAID through an executive order in 1961. Yet the President Trump, orders a momentary pause after winning a mandate for reform, and Democrats cry, constitutional crisis. This is after 4 years of reckless spending and unrepentant lawlessness from the Biden administration. I want the American people to understand how this works in Washington. As long as you're spending other people's money, no one bats an eye. But the second you want to save taxpayer dollars, the swamp cries wolf, or in this case, unprecedented constitutional crisis. This breathless, fake outrage from the left is utterly insane. And you know what the American people, they can see right through it. The generosity of Americans and the blessing of giving aid to others has always been one of our most valuable tools for diplomacy. The American people have a proud history of championing aid to our fellow man, but lawless bureaucrats have poisoned that goodwill. Many USAID programs are wasteful and actively sabotage our diplomatic relationships by forcing woke ideology on our partners. Just look at PEPFAR, a beacon of hope in the fight against HIV/AIDS, yet the Biden administration even weaponized this crucial program, jeopardizing lives and undermining our relationship with African nations. Under Administrator Powers, our message to Africa was explicit, as it was heinous. Abort your babies and violate your religious convictions, or we won't grant you life-saving aid. Let me be crystal clear to those who've been complicit in this betrayal. Firing those involved is just a start. We have a long way to go. And one last point. I want to correct the record on a couple of things. First, Elon Musk and the team that is working does not have access to personal data. They don't have access to your social security number. That is a lie. Elon Musk does have a security clearance. He has a top secret security clearance. By God, he makes the rockets for NASA. But the suggestion that he somehow can't be trusted to dig into how we're spending our money is nothing but a smokescreen to hide the corruption and the wasteful spending that has occurred there. And I am personally offended at the left's continued references to 19-year-olds and 21-year-olds in their doing work. There are 19-year-olds who have won the Medal of Honor defending this country. Just because you're 19 doesn't mean you're some child who can't be trusted. It is offensive. And if you're 19 years old out there, 20 years old, and you're serving this country, by God, your service matters. Keep serving. We thank you for that.
来自佛罗里达州的共和党众议员玛利亚·萨拉查则在听证会上质疑 USAID 的工作内容，并点名该机构资助的某些计划完全令人难堪。他特别提到 USAID 竟然投入资金支持变装皇后相关活动，质疑这些计划与美国的外交和发展目标有何关联，并批评这是荒谬至极的支出，直呼根本是完全绝对的丢脸。
We are in different times, and I'm just going to share with you within the time that I have 3 programs coming from Latin America, which I think that are highly embarrassing. Let's start with Venezuela, and here's the video that Chairman played before. Venezuelans, they're fleeing Marxism. They're hungry. The average Venezuelan weighs 15 pounds less because of lack of food. We know that Chavez has destroyed the country. They make it to Ecuador. They're tired, and then they encounter that the United States, which is the beacon of hope, is offering this program to become a drag queen. So I think there's something wrong with that picture. And I'm not sure if we can play it again, but I just wanted your opinion.
Well, that particular program was a State Department program. And I have great respect for the State Department, but I think it's appalling they did it, to be very frank with you.
So you do not agree with those $35,000
No,
invested?
I don't. I think we should stick with our basic mission.
Okay, well, but you agree that they have not. Not under you.
Oh,
but
no, they have not.
They have not.
And
okay,
I think
so
that
let's
needs
go
to be
I just want to
changed.
hear your thoughts because unfortunately time
Just one
is of
comment,
the essence. $2 million for Native Indians in Guatemala. President Giammattei called me. I've never had a president from a country saying, I don't want the United States money. Highly conservative. These are the Native Indians in Guatemala, people who are just, flipping the tortillas and they just want to learn how to do a job, not sex change surgeries. What do you think about that?
That's beyond what this AID mission is. I don't think we should be.
Good. That's all we need to know. Peru, in the Amazon. This is the jungle. This is not Jeff Bezos' Amazon. This is like where people have harsh conditions. They need mosquito nets to fight malaria. So $25,000 for diversity recruitment events. What is a diversity recruitment event in the middle of the jungle?
I have no idea. Congressman, just one comment. You can move aid to do what you want by hiring a development professional, a conservative, who knows how to manage a large, complex operation. Mark Green was such a person, under Trump.
But then what happened between your time and this time? Tell me. What happened?
Well, politics gets involved.
Oh, politics. But then Elon Musk comes and tries to clean politics and go back to the original mission of the program. Is that correct?
I think it would be useful if Musk and some of his staff would go to the field and see the projects.
Well, I think they would take a different view. I'm sure they don't have time, sir, to do that. But what I'm saying is that he did something that, according to what you just explained, brings benefit to the USAID programs.
The USAID staff do what the political appointees tell them to do.
Well, okay.
They don't initiate these things.
They don't.
No.
So that means that all these directives came from the White House.
The White House, yes, and the State Department.
So okay, but then the White House, the State Department responds to the White House. So you are telling me that under the Biden administration, the USAID lost its course? Yes or no?
I think AID needs to be more independent.
最后，来自佛罗里达州的共和党众议员安娜·保利纳·露娜则在听证会上与一名证人发生激烈交锋。他对 USAID 内部的一本指导手册提出质疑，并展示了该文件令人不安的内容。
Because I'm disappointed that our taxpayer dollars are funding some of these items. I mean, to just put this in perspective, in 2021, the Special Operations Command under Mark Milley, as chairman of the Joint Chiefs, put out an instruction manual, a vision for 2021 and beyond, that contained instructions and examples on how the military could work with the State Department, Intel Services, and USAID using race riots. Here's examples of some of the instruction manuals here, 1 and 2, in order to destabilize nations. In addition to that, they advocated for setting up job fairs near some of these riots so that disaffected workers could gain employment. Now, as a member of Congress, I ask myself, did anyone in USAID get elected to Congress? How about to a presidency? When you are acting in the shadows and you are destabilizing nations using race wars to do it and then advocating that the military does it, in my opinion, not only do you put the future generations that would have to fight in those wars in jeopardy, but at the end of the day, you're operating without any oversight. So I guess the question for you guys is, Mr. Natsios, is that something that you were aware of? Are you aware that that instruction manual is being promoted not just with the military under Milley, but that USAID may be operating in this capacity? Because in my opinion, and I'm sure I speak on behalf of many of my constituents, I don't think that's where our taxpayer dollars need to be going.